Have you ever felt like you're fighting against yourself? That even when you know exactly what needs to be done, something inside pulls you in the opposite direction? That silent, almost invisible force has a name: self-sabotage. And it's not just a bad habit. It's a deep-rooted pattern shaped by how you see yourself and how you relate to the world. In this video, we'll uncover how this hidden behavior might be quietly dismantling your life without you even noticing. And more than that, how philosophy and psychology can help you change the course and reclaim control. Self-sabotage is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when, despite wanting to improve or achieve something, you end up acting against your own goals. It's as if part of you doesn't believe you deserve to succeed, doesn't trust your own potential, or fears what might happen if everything goes right. This behavior can show up subtly: procrastinating important tasks, avoiding responsibilities, or getting involved in relationships you know aren't good for you. And the most dangerous part, it often happens without you realizing it, like an autopilot quietly undermining your decisions. Psychology suggests that self-sabotage often stems from limiting beliefs, distorted ideas about yourself, usually formed in childhood or during emotional pain. For instance, if you grew up hearing you weren't good enough, you might carry that belief into adulthood and unconsciously act in ways that reinforce it. Trauma, rejection, and negative experiences can shape a worldview where failure feels safer than success. In such cases, the mind prefers familiar zones, even if uncomfortable, over risking the unknown, which might bring pain or exposure. Philosophy, on the other hand, invites us to reflect on the root of this internal confusion. Socrates said, "Know thyself." And though simple, this phrase holds immense depth, because if you don't know who you are, how can you know what you truly want? How can you tell the difference between a genuine desire and an expectation imposed by others? Without that self-knowledge, you become vulnerable to living a life that isn't yours, following paths that don't make sense, and repeating behaviors that pull you away from your essence. In this context, self-sabotage is a symptom of the disconnect between who you are and how you live. That's why so many people feel stuck, frustrated, like they're running in circles. They want to change but can't. They want to grow but keep holding themselves back. And the issue isn't a lack of effort. It's a lack of clarity about who they are and why they do what they do. When you don't understand your motivations, fears, and patterns, you end up being ruled by them. That's when self-sabotage takes hold. Silent, persistent, destructive. Understanding this mechanism is the first step to breaking it. But to do that, you need to go beyond the surface and start investigating what's behind your choices, habits, and reactions. Because only when you begin to see yourself honestly can you start to transform yourself consistently. And that transformation begins with a question that seems simple, but is anything but obvious. Who are you, really? Self-sabotage doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of an internal conflict between parts of you that aren't in harmony. To grasp this, it's essential to understand the concept of the self, your sense of identity. The I isn't a single solid thing, as many imagine. It's built over time, shaped by your experiences, emotions, traumas, and repeated behavior patterns. Neuroscience shows that the brain organizes this information into networks that form your identity. But often, these networks clash. You might have learned, for example, that you need to please others to be accepted, yet feel like you're losing yourself in the process. Or you may crave independence, but find yourself emotionally dependent in every relationship. These contradictions create a fragmented self, torn between who you want to be and who you were taught to be. When you live out of sync with your true self, internal noise begins to surface. You want to change but can't. You want to stop procrastinating but keep doing it. You want to take care of yourself but neglect your needs. This isn't about laziness or lack of willpower. It's about misalignment. It's like trying to drive a car with the steering wheel turned one way and the wheels another. You push forward but stay stuck. The mind enters conflict because one part wants progress, while another clings to old, often unconscious patterns. And the more you ignore this tension, the more it shows up as self-sabotage. Philosophy also sheds light on this phenomenon. When you live without reflecting on who you are, you end up adopting identities that aren't yours. You define yourself by what you do, what you own, or what others expect. But that's not you. Those are just surface layers. The true self lies beneath and can only be accessed when you start asking, what do I really feel? What do I truly want? What bothers me? And why? This kind of inquiry is uncomfortable because it forces you to face truths you may have avoided for years. But it's also liberating because it allows you to live with greater authenticity. The fragmentation of the self isn't a mistake. It's a consequence of living unconsciously, but it can be repaired. And the first step is recognizing that you're not whole, that parts of you have been silenced, repressed, or distorted, and that to break free from self-sabotage, you need to gather those parts, understand their origins, and begin building a more coherent identity. This doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with a decision to stop running from yourself. And that decision becomes even more powerful when you begin to observe the environment you live in, because often the context around you is the main fuel feeding your self-sabotage. Most people believe their failures come entirely from within, as if everything is the result of a lack of discipline, poor focus, or an inability to stay motivated. But that view is incomplete. The environment you live in has a direct and powerful impact on your behavior. If you're impulsive and trying to stick to a diet, but you're surrounded by friends constantly eating junk food, the problem isn't just your impulsivity, it's the context reinforcing that trait. If you struggle with concentration, but study in a noisy, chaotic space with your phone buzzing beside you, it's unrealistic to expect mental clarity. The environment isn't neutral. It shapes, strengthens, or weakens who you are. Behavioral psychology shows that humans respond to external stimuli automatically. This means that even with clear intentions, your actions can be sabotaged by triggers that activate old patterns. A smell, an image, a phrase, a presence. Any of these can reignite behaviors you're trying to leave behind. And when you don't recognize this influence, you end up blaming yourself for not changing, unaware that you're swimming against an invisible current. In this case, self-sabotage isn't a personal failure. It's the result of living in an environment that disrespects your limits, undermines your goals, and clashes with your emotional structure. Philosophy helps us understand this dilemma as well. Schopenhauer said that man can do what he wants, but he cannot will what he wants. In other words, you may have goals, but you don't control the desires triggered by your surroundings. And if those stimuli are constant, intense, and misaligned with your values, you'll be pulled away from yourself. That's why changing your environment is just as important as changing your mindset. There's no point in wanting discipline if you live in chaos. No point in wanting health if you're surrounded by people who mock your efforts. The context must be reshaped so it becomes fertile ground for transformation, not a battlefield. This adjustment begins with honest reflection. Where are you? Who do you spend time with? What do you consume? What surrounds you every day? Every element of your environment influences your decisions, even if you don't notice. And the more you ignore that influence, the more you sabotage yourself. The solution isn't isolation. It's creating a space that respects who you are and supports who you want to become. That might mean changing habits, cutting ties, reorganizing your space, or limiting access to certain things. It may be uncomfortable at first, but it's liberating in the long run. Because when your environment stops being an enemy, you stop fighting it and begin walking with more ease. Yet even with a well-adjusted environment, a deeper challenge remains. Understanding why you keep repeating harmful behaviors, even when you know they hurt you. And that answer lies in how you interpret your emotions. Self-sabotage is not an isolated act. It repeats itself, feeds on itself, and becomes a cycle that, over time, feels impossible to break. You begin with a genuine intention to change a habit, improve your health, commit to a project, but soon comes the failure. That failure isn't just a stumble, it's interpreted as proof that you're not capable. Guilt appears, followed by frustration, and then you try again, without changing anything fundamental. The result? The same failure, the same pain, the same reinforcement of the idea that you're not good enough, not capable, not deserving. This loop isn't just psychological, it's emotional, behavioral, and even neurological. The brain learns patterns, and the more you repeat this cycle, the more automatic it becomes. These sabotaging thoughts, I'm not good enough, I always mess things up, there's no point in trying, don't come out of nowhere. They're built over a lifetime, often starting in childhood. Psychoanalysis shows that constant criticism, subtle rejection, unfair comparisons, and unreachable expectations can shape a distorted self-image. You grow up believing you must constantly prove yourself, that you can't make mistakes, that you're not worthy of affection unless you're perfect. And when adulthood demands choices, responsibility, and autonomy, that fragile structure collapses. You sabotage yourself, not because you want to fail, but because you've learned that failure is inevitable, and, in a way, more comfortable than the risk of trying and being disappointed. Philosophy helps us see this cycle from another angle. Kierkegaard spoke of the despair of not being who you are. This despair arises when you live a life that doesn't reflect your essence, when your actions contradict your values, when you drift away from yourself. Self-sabotage is a way of maintaining that distance. It's as if you're trapped between the desire to change and the fear of discovering who you really are. Because change requires facing uncomfortable truths, shedding masks, breaking patterns that keep you safe, even if they hurt you. Breaking this cycle requires more than willpower. It requires awareness. You need to recognize the pattern, understand its origins, question your beliefs, and begin to act differently. That doesn't mean you'll always get it right, but it means you'll stop repeating the same mistakes expecting different results. Awareness is the first step toward freedom. When you understand that you are not your failures, not your distorted beliefs, not what others said about you, you begin to make space for a new story. A story where you can make mistakes without destroying yourself, try without punishing yourself, grow without sabotaging yourself. But for this new narrative to hold, you must understand how your emotions are processed and how they directly influence your decisions. Self-knowledge is not an intellectual luxury, it's a practical necessity. You can't change what you don't understand, and that's why so many people remain trapped in cycles of self-sabotage without knowing why. They try to change habits, improve behaviors, reach goals, but fail repeatedly, not due to lack of effort, but due to lack of clarity about who they truly are. Knowing that you're an engineer, that you're 30 years old, and live in a certain place, says nothing about your essence. These are external facts that place you in time and space, but they don't reveal your emotional traits, your fears, your contradictions, or the patterns that govern you. Self-knowledge begins when you ask yourself honestly, what affects me? What irritates me? What paralyzes me? Are you anxious, impulsive, needy, perfectionist? Do you struggle with criticism? Avoid conflict at all costs? Constantly seek approval? These traits are not flaws. They are parts of you that need to be understood. Because when you understand your emotional triggers, you begin to see why you react in certain ways, why you avoid certain situations, why you repeat behaviors that hurt you. And this awareness is liberating because it turns internal chaos into something that can be named, analyzed, and gradually transformed. Even without therapy, it's possible to begin. Reflective writing, for example, allows you to put your thoughts on paper and spot patterns that previously went unnoticed. Meditation helps you observe your internal states without judgment, revealing what lies behind mental restlessness. The important thing is to step out of autopilot, to stop living as if you're following a script you didn't write, and start questioning every scene, every line, every choice. Philosophy teaches us that the human being is a project under construction. You are not a finished product. You are a process. And that process requires attention, courage, and a willingness to look inward. Because only when you truly know yourself can you begin to make decisions that make sense, that respect your limits, that honor your values. Without that, any change will be superficial, unstable, and easily sabotaged. Self-knowledge reveals who you are, but knowing who you are is not enough. You must decide who you want to be. And it's in that space between what you discover and what you choose that true transformation begins. Nietzsche once said that man is something that must be overcome. This phrase is not about despising who we are, but about understanding that we are always in process, always in motion. You are not a fixed, defined, immutable being. You are a project under construction, and every choice you make is a brick in that building. Self-sabotage happens when you abandon this power of choice and live by impulse, by fear, by conditioning. When you repeat patterns without questioning them. When you settle into comfort zones that no longer serve you. When you let the past dictate the present. But you can choose differently. You can choose to know yourself, to respect yourself, to take care of yourself. You can choose to say no to what destroys you, even if it causes discomfort. You can choose to distance yourself from toxic relationships, harmful habits, self-deprecating thoughts. You can choose to act with awareness, even when everything around you seems to push you toward autopilot. And that choice doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. Because every time you choose with clarity, you move closer to your best version. Not an idealized, flawless version, but a more integrated, more coherent, more free version. The philosophy of choice reminds us that we are not victims of fate, nor hostages of the past. We are authors of our own journey. And even though we can't control everything, we can always decide how we will respond, what we will prioritize, what we will build. Choosing is an act of courage because it demands responsibility, but it is also an act of freedom because it gives us back the power we so often hand over to chance. Self-sabotage is not a destiny, it's a pattern, and patterns can be broken. It all begins with a decision, the decision to look inward with courage and start building a life that makes sense for who you truly are. If you've made it this far, you've already taken the first step. Now keep going, because the life you want to live begins when you stop fighting against yourself and start walking by your own side.